Thanks, Karen. Thanks so much for inviting me, and thanks to everyone who's signed in today. I'll just share my presentation now on the screen. I hope you all enjoy what I've put together. I might mention I'm not as expert as some of the kind of previous speakers who've spoken at these lunchtime webinars. I'm a doctor with a kind of an interest in environmentalism, but not a scientist as such. But I'll give a good stab today, hopefully, of trying to kind of explain the relationships between biodiversity and human health. I think you should be seeing a full screen now. So
you can see it.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay. So just a little overview of what I'll chat about today. I'll give you a little introduction, explain a little bit about Irish Doctors for the Environment. I'm speaking in the capacity of a member, as a member of Irish Doctors for the Environment. I'll go through some definitions. I'll look at just the disconnection with nature. The Gaia theory I'll just touch on briefly. The main bulk of the work will be looking at the WHO framework and the work they've done at looking at the relationship between health and biodiversity and the benefits that biodiversity can give to our health. And then I'll briefly look at some interesting research papers. So Irish Doctors for the Environment are a kind of collective group of medical professionals in Ireland who are focused on promoting, improving and sustaining the health of humans by striving to improve the health of the environment. So that's our mission as such. Now, what the Irish Doctors for the Environment do, they're committed to change. So an agent for change through activism. Advocacy, IDE is committed to kind of using their position of privileged professionals to speak out on issues related to health and environment and to use our platform positively for environmental activism. Science, IDE aims to be involved in the promotion of planetary health science in Ireland and to add to discussion on the cross-section of climate science and healthcare. Planetary health science is a big part of the work we do and trying to incorporate that into policy. And education finally is something we're kind of big on and committed on educating the public, and we see that as an important part of our role, but also educating doctors on the climate crisis and the biodiversity crises and their health effects. So we aim to be a conduit through which those interested can learn more about the issues facing us and also about the role healthcare plays in these crises. So healthcare has a huge carbon footprint, for example. So I'll just briefly cover some definitions. Human health, what is it? It's important to look at human health as a state of physical, mental and social well-being, and not just the absence of disease or infirmity. Health can be considered a dynamic state. It is not fixed or absolute, but constantly responding to the environment, social, biological, emotional and cognitive conditions. A brief definition of nature can be thought of as the entirety of the physical and biological world, not made by humans, although possibly influenced by humans. Then biodiversity itself is the variability of living organisms from all sources, including terrestrial, marine, and other aquatic ecosystems, and the ecological complexes of which they are part. It includes diversity within species, between species, and of ecosystems. So some other terms that might be useful just from a kind of a policy and a kind of an Irish Doctors for the Environment perspective. One Health, it's a kind of interesting approach that's been kind of applied by the WHO and by governments around the world. It's an approach to designing and implementing programs, policies, legislation, and research in which multiple sectors communicate and work together to achieve better public health outcomes. The One Health approach is critical to addressing health threats in the animal, human, and environmental interface. Then there's planetary health. This is the ambition to promote human health through the protection of the natural systems on which humans depend. It investigates the effects of environmental change on human health and well-being, as well as the political, economic and social systems that govern those effects. So just some definitions just to kind of, before we get stuck into everything. And then I'll just give us a bit of a background on health and biodiversity before we look at some of the research. So biodiversity, I suppose, what's its relevance to human health? I mean, I'm sure lots of you have an interest in this, and I will probably be able to identify the relevance to human health. Everything really. We are biodiversity. We are all interconnected, and biodiversity is a cornerstone of human health and well-being, and all the life around us is of course inextricably linked to human health, and we'll explain how in a while. Just a reminder that Earth has lost 68% of its ecosystems and associated biodiversity in the last 50 years due to anthropogenic activity. And it's important to recognize, you know, the kind of the lack of knowledge, I suppose, around this interrelationship between human health and biodiversity, but it is an area of kind of growing research and obviously greater awareness amongst the public. So I think just on a very basic level, the consequences of global ecological and environmental disruption are daunting. You know, we're all terrified by this, of course. And how does this affect us? Nature provides the basic conditions for human health. The environment protects human health, and pressure on natural environments, therefore, thus threatens human health. So just give a little bit of an overview, and I think it's important to kind of to communicate to the public and to kind of grasp these concepts and the value of biodiversity or health. It's kind of, we need to gain perspective and look at things in different, you know, time frames, you know, geological time frames, and also kind of look at how the evolution of humans and how kind of life on Earth exists and interrelates. So the Gaia hypothesis, I think it's kind of valuable to just briefly look at this. It was kind of 1972, a scientist, James Lovelock, is recently deceased, kind of proposed this hypothesis. And it was suggested that living organisms on the planet interact with their surrounding inorganic environment to form a synergetic and self-regulating system that created and now maintains the climate and biochemical conditions that make life on Earth possible. So he was into this concept of cooperation amongst living things on Earth, and that was vital for, you know, sustaining life, this cooperation or coevolution as it was called. At the time, it was kind of widely ridiculed. It was a lot of scientists dismissed it. It ran contrary to Darwinism in some people's eyes, and you know, it was a time when we were kind of diving into kind of consumer culture, individualism, and kind of the doctrine of unregulated capitalism. So it was quite counterculture at the time. But, you know, more recently, now that we've woken up to the biodiversity crisis, his kind of ideas seem less kind of left field. And there was a conference in 2001 where more than 1,000 scientists met in Amsterdam, and they basically vindicated his theory on some levels, and stating that, you know, the planet does behave releasing this statement that the planet behaves as a single self-regulating system comprised of physical, chemical, biological, and human components. So much is still debated about this, but I think as we finally begin to acknowledge the severity of the biodiversity crisis, Lovelock's views on the interdependence of living things in order to sustain life seem like an obvious and undeniable truth. So just a quote from Lovelock again: "The Earth is more than just a home, it's a living system, and we are part of it." So humans and nature, in order just to gain some perspective that I was talking about, the kind of the importance of it, like if you look at Homo sapiens, the genus Homo, we first originated somewhere between 3 to 2.5 million years ago, Homo erectus being the first of the Homo genus. And then us human beings, Homo sapiens, the oldest known remains of Homo sapiens date back over 300,000 years. So, and nature has been biodiversity in nature has been alongside us for this journey all the time, at a huge kind of mass, which has suddenly, you know, changed, you know, is rapidly. And we're kind of, this is just a reminder that the Earth has lost 68% of its ecosystems and associated biodiversity in the last 50 years due to anthropogenic activity. So just to gain perspective, that like you just can't emphasize enough the kind of magnitude of that switch, you know, in the level of nature that's kind of coexisting alongside us. So can this be inconsequential to our health or our existence? I mean, surely not. And surely there have to be catastrophic tipping points on the horizon, or they're already here. So, you know, it is shocking, and we need to kind of get this message across, and we need to be shocked by this, and we need to kind of think about how we can, you know, communicate that to people, to the public, so as you know, we can react positively to these crises. So briefly, just the disconnect with nature is a huge factor. An essential human connection with the natural world has been lost whilst we live in the midst of a mass extinction. The disconnect has been gathering momentum for millennia, really. And in ways, our disconnect from nature has facilitated some of our greatest feats, it's fair to say. Separating ourselves from the natural world has allowed us to kind of run full steam ahead with the agrarian revolution, the industrial revolution, capitalism, and in more recent form neoliberalism. So I think sadly this disconnect is also kind of could be the cause of our downfall, and it is leading to the annihilation of the summation of billions of years of evolution, which is biodiversity. So to touch on what the topics I've been asked to speak about today, biodiversity and its relationships with human health, I think we can draw upon some great work the WHO, the World Health Organization, have done. So the next part will kind of draw from research they released in 2015, a paper called Connecting Global Priorities, Biodiversity and Human Health, a State of Knowledge Review. And this was a comprehensive review of the numerous ways in which biodiversity underpins health and the health risks associated with ecosystem disruption and biodiversity loss. And also a more recent paper post-COVID called Nature, Biodiversity and Health, an overview of interconnections. So we'll look at these papers. So just a changing world is kind of the theme, okay? A risk to nature and a risk to health. So obviously we all know processes of social, demographic and climate change are amongst us. Habitat loss, overexploitation and pollution pose a substantial threat to the natural environment with potential catastrophic consequences for human health and well-being. Degradation of nature and ecosystems and loss of biodiversity from plant and animal species to microbiomes within the human gut can threaten health. So it's a huge topic, and we'll try and get down to the kind of the nuts and bolts of it, and the kind of key ways in which biodiversity is so vital to our health. Just a bit more of a background. We'll all know this about these kind of facts, and they'll have been covered again. The changing environment. Sea levels are rising. Ocean acidification is causing problems to marine life. Increased greenhouse gases are causing heat waves, droughts, and wildfires. 75% of terrestrial environment and 66% of the marine environment have been significantly altered through human actions. 1 million animal and plant species are threatened with extinction over the coming decades. Again, 68% of global wildlife populations have been decimated. Pollution of land, air, and aquatic bodies also continues. 300 to 400 million tons of heavy metals, toxic sludge, solvents, and other forms of mostly untreated waste from industrial facilities are discharged into our waters annually. Societies are changing, population growth, rising demands for energy, water, food production, unsustainable production and consumption patterns. Obviously, kind of the consumerist culture is a huge part to play in this, and still a largely untackled increase in waste generation, which is a global issue. And if you look at the European region, for example, aging populations, and all these aging populations demographics are making humans more vulnerable to environmental changes and the health risks that come along with those. Changing land use. Humans have always modified and altered land use and cover. Estimated that half of the global habitat land surface is already occupied by human use. Intensification of agriculture is a huge part to play with increasing use of industrial fertilizers, pesticides and herbicides. And transformation of natural and biodiverse ecosystems to agricultural production systems has led to an increase in food provision, but came at the expense of pollination of agricultural crops, flood regulation, regulation of pests, infectious diseases. So an unequal world. Our access to nature varies hugely, and there's an uneven distribution out there. So depending on your social status, your residential location, many individuals will have different access to nature and therefore exposed to different levels of environmental risk. Exposure to environmental health risks is typically disproportionately high among low-income, minority, and marginalized communities, while opportunities for environmental health benefit are unfairly distributed. Green spaces and trees in cities can mitigate risks associated with excess urban heat, but green spaces are often less prevalent in poorer neighborhoods. So we'll touch upon this a little bit later, a little bit more later. So, but just to kind of communicate that point there, this is just a kind of a map of the density of tree cover across Dublin. And you'll see the orange and yellow areas are the lower kind of areas and the red areas. And you'll see that there's a great inequality here amongst the distribution to trees in Dublin. Obviously the south having much more trees and around the Phoenix Park. But then there's this big kind of axis that runs from the northeast to the southwest with very limited tree cover. And that's an example of just unequal access and kind of a green apartheid that exists in many of our societies. So the benefits of nature and health for health and well-being. Benefits of nature for health are vast. We've evolved from an interdependent web of ecosystems that comprises biodiversity, and humans are part of that. And it's as simple as that. The WHO groups these benefits into ecosystem services. It's a useful way of looking at it and breaking it down because, as I said, this is such a vast kind of topic. The framework views nature as a vital support system for human health, with delivering of provisioning, regulating, cultural and supporting services. So those are the headings kind of for how nature can offer kind of vital services for our health. The approach also covers, the WHO approach also covers 4 suggested pathways for reducing harm, restoring capacities and building capacities and causing harm. So it's another way of looking at it. But I'll just look at you to kind of, just so you can grasp the kind of an overview of all these kind of key headings and create a bit of a mind map. This is a useful diagram here. We have supporting services, enabling the generation of all ecosystem services, so soil formation, nutrient cycling, photosynthesis, production of oxygen, water, cleaning, and cycling, production of biomass. Then we have provisioning services, fresh water, vital for life, food production, vital for life, wood and fiber, fuel and energy, natural medicines, all vital for our survival, all impossible without biodiversity. We've got regulating services. So climate regulation, vital for our environments to be livable, habitable, flood regulation, regulation of diseases, and then it goes on. We've got cultural services. These are the kind of some of the less kind of tangible sometimes benefits. We have mental health promotion and social contract, recreational opportunities, and aesthetic value and inspiration by nature, and spiritual elements as well. So I'll touch just a little bit on some interesting facts here from that paper, the WHO paper. More than 80% of global wastewater is discharged untreated into the environment. Up to 1 million species are threatened with extinction in the decades, as we touched upon already. There are an estimated 8 million animal species and plant species on Earth. Around 4 billion people worldwide rely primarily on natural medicines, so medicines derived from biodiversity. 70% of cancer drugs are natural or synthetic products inspired by nature. And plastic pollution is increasing, and obviously consumption per capita of natural materials is increasing hugely as well. So why is biodiversity important to health? We talked a little bit just about the services, the kind of those kind of general headings, but I'll look at in a little bit more detail at some of these headings, and it's another way of kind of grouping those benefits. Okay. So there's freshwater systems is the one I'll talk about. Water, all life requires water. Freshwater systems relate to human health, well-being, interacting with and underpinning the majority of ecosystem services. Availability of fresh water is one of the most fundamental requirements for human health and well-being. Obviously, we all can't survive without water. Biodiversity, through its role in water purification and the atmospheric cycle, as well as erosion and sedimentation control, is one of the key factors for functioning freshwater systems. And water security is a huge issue, obviously, as we witnessed this in Europe this summer with the heat waves, and across the world, of course. The degradation of functioning ecosystems such as upland forests and biodiverse wetlands leads to the loss of significant water resources. So that means water management is going to have to become a huge kind of priority for governments with these pressures. Then air quality is another topic, a huge relevance to humans. So while H2O we also need oxygen. Okay, so poor air quality has been shown to contribute to human morbidity and mortality by affecting the cardiovascular, respiratory, and metabolic systems. A huge amount of research has been done by this, and Irish Doctors for Environment are doing some campaigning on this as well. Across the WHO region, exposure to particulate matter, so this is the kind of the dirt and the dust in our atmosphere, decreases the life expectancy of every person by an average of almost 1 year, mostly owing to increased risk of cardiovascular and respiratory disease and lung cancer. But it's another huge area, dementia. Actually, a lot of research is showing that this particular matter can increase the risks of dementia, which is a huge societal issue as well. So clean air is obviously so vital. And biodiversity can actually play a very important role in protecting the air quality and maintaining good air quality. So how does biodiversity help our air? Trees can remove gaseous air pollution, such as ozone, nitrogen dioxide, sulfur dioxide, through their leaves. Okay, so on the road, you know, there's all these beautiful London plane trees, all these kind of harmful pollutants settle on the leaves. Okay, and that means you and I in urban environments end up inhaling less. There's also obviously a huge benefit of trees for absorbing carbon dioxide as well, and contributing to reduced carbon dioxide emissions and reducing the risk of global heating. So tree canopies also regulate the air temperature within our cities, particularly in urban areas, through evaporation and shade. So providing, this is going to be a huge issue in planning cities in the future. Trees are going to have to become a huge part of regulating our urban environments and making them safe. And yeah, through filtration and evaporation, as I said, biologically diverse ecosystems can directly contribute to maintaining good air quality. So this is just on the way to the airport. You might be familiar with this view. This is the mature London plane trees doing a huge, important job at kind of allowing particulate matter to settle on the leaves and providing shade at the same time. You know, and all particulate matter and harmful products coming from obviously the vehicles below, and that's a real issue. We have to remove the vehicles, but trees can be a huge help. Another topic, like seas, how does marine life relevant to human health? So oceans cover 70% of our planet's surface and make up 90% of all the space available to life. So ocean and coastal ecosystems sequester carbon, regulate nutrients, and release oxygen through photosynthesis. So they're a hugely important role in regulating the globe's chemistry and global warming. Obviously, absorption of all that carbon dioxide is vital, but also in terms of a source of employment, recreation, and cultural benefits. Consumption of food, obviously, you know, if sustainably, vitally, if sustainably. Some people would argue there's no such thing as sustainable seafood anymore. And obviously the access to blue spaces and to interacting with coasts can be good for our physical and mental well-being, particularly for people from the more lower socioeconomic backgrounds. So again, how specifically can the marine environment and biodiversity protect our health? Medicines is actually an interesting one. A lot of medicines are derived from and a lot of marine life. So functioning marine ecosystems are often the basis for a lot of pharmaceutical research and subsequent production of medicines. So I'll just click to the next one there. So I'm obviously just interacting with blue spaces, more of the same, positive for our mental health. So another topic then to consider is soil, agriculture, nutrition, and food security. So how does our soil beneficial to human health? Again, soil is the kind of the substrate for all food. It's a vital kind of requirement for food production. And obviously this soil quality and soil health is hugely threatened at the moment. And so currently in the European Union, 41% of land surface is used for farming. So it's a huge proportion. Obviously, biodiversity is suffering as a result. So there's accelerating declines in soil quality and biodiversity, which will affect access to food. And evidence also suggests that dietary diversity plays an important role in the gut microbiome, which influences metabolism and other health indices. So obviously you hear often these claims that we only have maybe 60, 30, 100 more harvests. They're slightly overstated, but soil erosion is a problem, a big problem, and we do need to address it. And the biodiversity and the diversity of organisms in soil is being compromised by the reduction in kind of natural ecosystems, and this is could have huge consequences for, you know, agriculture in the future. So another topic I'm going to discuss briefly is infectious diseases. So, and how biodiversity and infectious diseases and human health are related. So obviously, all infectious diseases are living things in themselves. And we group them into bacteria, viruses, fungi, and parasites. Viruses causing the common cold, COVID, for example, fungi causing rashes sometimes. Also, the list is endless. But these are how the organisms are grouped. And so zoonosis is an important concept to understand, as getting greater attention since COVID. Zoonotic diseases are diseases or infections that are transmitted from vertebrate animals to humans. So infectious zoonosis compromises a significant share of new and existing diseases in humans. So, and we can categorize these in terms of how they're transmitted. So directly transmitted diseases, these are where they're picked up directly from a host animal. So in the case of COVID, it was a bat, perhaps. There's also Ebola, HIV, and SARS. These are all directly transmitted diseases where the host animal passes on to the human. Then there's vector-borne diseases. These are things like mosquitoes passing on malaria, for example, or ticks passing on Lyme disease. And then there's diseases caused by parasites, so things like hookworm. Okay, so a major public health threat posed by these pathogens and these bacteria, viruses, and parasites. And we saw that with COVID-19 and the huge effects it had on globally and societally. So what's the relationship between biodiversity and these, and how does biodiversity loss kind of affect the chances of humans catching more diseases, zoonotic diseases? So it's a really complex topic, but when we lose biodiversity, the level of biodiversity and the level of risk is increased of animals, not humans, developing pathogens. So if there's just less biodiversity out there, okay, the chances of that bat perhaps getting a pathogen that could be passed to the human is increased because he's getting less other infections from other animals in the animal kingdom, and ultimately there's less diversity within the various infections that the animal kingdom are experiencing. So that's one way of looking at it. But then obviously this is a slightly easier way to kind of examine it. When the idea of us coming in contact with animals more easily, and as we intrude on their ecosystems, on their habitats, there's increased risk of humans interacting with these animals that have these pathogens. So less biodiversity means less diseases and less immunity amongst the animal kingdom, but also less biodiversity means, and us encroaching on biodiversity and ecosystems means increased chances of us catching something from another kind of living organism. So obviously international travel was a big factor as well, and we saw that with how quickly COVID spread across the globe. There's also the topic of microbes in the environment and the human body. So microbes are, what we just mentioned there: bacteria, viruses, fungi, and parasites. All these tiny living cellular organisms. So they're actually everywhere, all over. They're in our stomachs right now. They're helping our digestion. And they perform essential ecosystem services, oxygen production, decomposition, and nutrient cycling, vital in pharmaceutical production as well, antibiotics. So microbes they're a crucial kind of building block to life. And the microbes that humans live with, specifically the ones I mentioned in the gut, are vital for breaking down food and regulating the immune system. So again, any interruption in the microbes, which are part of biodiversity, can subsequently affect the microbes within humans, and subsequently affect our health and our immune systems. And this is a growing area of research. It's called the microbiome. It's the microorganisms that live within our bodies and are vital to our health and our kind of our bodily functions. So any disruptions to microbes globally and to biodiversity can theoretically affect human health. So another topic I talked about earlier is medicine, and how biodiversity is so vital for the creation of medicines, and hugely important for human health then. So around 600 species of plants, animals, and fungi and microbes are used for their medicinal, nutritional, and aromatic properties. So we don't want to lose this vital resource for kind of medicine production. So finally, then, I suppose another benefit is just of biodiversity is having access to biodiversity, and how this can be beneficial. Sometimes this kind of is a little less tangible and quantifiable, but it's a growing area of research. Increased exposure to green space and blue space is associated with various indicators of good physical and mental health. Lots of research has been done on this. Visiting green and blue spaces can promote and support a physically active lifestyle. Higher levels of greenness around a person's home are associated with reductions in the risk of death. So exposure to green and blue spaces is associated with higher levels of life satisfaction also. So lots of positives there to our mental and physical health. There's a famous study done on the Japanese custom of forest bathing, Shinrin-yoku. And basically, the study showed that spending times in forests could reduce blood pressure, lower cortisol levels. Cortisol is a kind of a stress hormone in the body, and improve concentration and memory. So it also noted that a chemical released by trees and plants, chemicals released by trees and plants called phytoncides, was found to boost the immune system. So this is kind of a groundbreaking piece of research, and Japan had always kind of extolled the health benefits of spending time in nature. It was part of their culture, but this was kind of an actual scientific paper which government could then base policy on, and they introduced it into their public health campaign, and it became a kind of something which doctors could then recommend a patient to do if they were stressed or having mental health problems. And this is kind of a growing area of medicine as well. It's called social prescribing. So instead of prescribing a medicine, you might suggest someone spend some time in nature, and the benefits can often accrue in terms of a reduction in stress or blood pressure. So it's nature therapy really is essentially what it is, and this diagram just kind of runs over it. You're stressed, you go to a forest, it has restorative effects. There's an actual physiological kind of process happening in the body where you relax, your blood pressure drops, your immune system recovers. So we often know when we're run down and we're stressed, we often pick up bugs more easily, colds, coughs and colds, and this is kind of would be a way of preventing that. It ultimately engaging in nature therapy could prevent you getting that cold, or for example, with a high blood pressure. So I'm a little tight for time. I'll try and get through the last little bits now. There's also a famous study done in Pennsylvania hospital in the 70s, where they looked at patients in the 70s and 80s and compared the outcomes of patients who'd had a view of nature and those who hadn't had a view of nature, just had a view of a brick wall. And really interesting kind of conclusions were reached. Patients who had a view of nature and a natural scene had shorter post-operative hospital stays, so they recovered more quickly, received fewer negative evaluative comments in nurses, so were easier to care for presumably, and took fewer potent painkillers than the patients who didn't have the view of nature. So that was really interesting, and then kind of a scientifically based, evidence-based study there. So as I said, often it's hard to kind of tangibly measure these benefits, but it's a growing area of research in medicine, and we'll be seeing lots more of it. Here's just an interesting view of Cork University Hospital. There's a row of mature trees there, which were, as you can see, the hospital bed windows there to the left. These were possibly offering the same benefits we just mentioned from that Pennsylvania study to the patients in the ward. And tragically, they were all felled recently. And this is Owen Lettuce. He's a kind of a plant scientist in in UCC, and apparently they've reached the ends of their lives, all of the trees at the same time, which seems a bit strange. So these are the attitudes we're coming up with against still. So it's difficult to kind of change this kind of groupthink and this kind of neglect to kind of value the health benefits of nature, as we have a lot of work to do clearly still. So this quote was just in the concluding remarks of the Japanese study that was done on the benefits of tree baiting in Japan. When one ponders humans existing less than 0.01% of the species' history in modern surroundings, and the other 99.99% of the time living in nature, it is no wonder some humans yearn and are drawn back to where human physiological and psychological functions began and were naturally supported. So it's going back to that kind of the time frame, the geological kind of time spans. And like, we've always been surrounded by nature. Modern urban environments are rare, and everything that comes with it, the decrease in biodiversity, is a very recent phenomenon. And to kind of neglect to think that this could be having an effect on our health is absurd, really. Isn't having an effect on our health is absurd, really. So just to demonstrate how this is a growing area of research, the Irish Medical Journal, members of Irish Doctors for the Environment recently concluded in an article that was published in October entitled "The Benefits of Nature for Health and Well-Being." They stated that if access to nature was improved, people may start to connect and cherish nature more and consequently derive health benefits. Ireland should look to follow the lead of other European countries, particularly in considering green space expansion in the designs of cities and urban communities. So it's touching on the necessity of access to nature. It needs to be amongst us. We've been hermetically sealed and separated from nature for too long. We need to reintroduce it to our lives to develop an appreciation and a respect, and then allow us to kind of understand our interconnectedness and dependence. And this is hopefully going to change in the coming years. So it's vital that it does. Just quickly to cover some of the potential solutions to the biodiversity crisis and the subsequent health crisis it poses humanity. Activism is something I'd always believe in, and I think it really is working these days. System change, I mean, it's up for debate. Vastly more regulated form of capitalism needed, I think, at a minimum. You know, we need to stop depleting nature and using it as a kind of a means to kind of, a means of producing consumers products and unnecessary things. We need to kind of look at the concepts of green growth, degrowth, steady state economies, and this is getting more discussion. Citizens' assemblies, obviously, which was a catalyst for this discussion today and this series of talks. They're incredibly sophisticated kind of democratic devices, and hopefully some good things will come from the current Citizens' Assembly, but the recommendations really have to be implemented, or it's pointless. And that's down to activism to put that pressure on these Citizens' Assemblies and the government to kind of enact the recommendations. Education is a huge part of all environmentalism, and we need to educate people of all ages on the links between nature and health, and that's what our Doctors for the Environment are about. And this will eventually force political action. You can see it happening incrementally already. It's the lack of change is depressing, of course, and the pace of it is depressing, but it is happening. Natural ecosystems and their biodiversity must be protected by governments. That's a vital role of governments. The first principal role of a government is to protect its people, and by not protecting biodiversity, it's not protecting the health of its people. And we need to kind of shout that message out more. Supranational organizations need to be involved. We have the UN treaty, which unfortunately wasn't passed, but the proposal is to protect 3% of the high seas by 2030, and that vital connection between the marine life and human health needs to be recognized. So hopefully that will happen eventually. There's the concepts of One Health and planetary health, and we really need to promote these kind of ways of designing policy that I mentioned earlier. Public perceptions are incrementally changing against a racing clock. I think it's fair to say. It remains to be seen what biodiversity will be salvaged and the negative effects that it will have on human health. But I think there's really is reason for hope. I think we possibly, we talk about negative tipping points, and Greta Thunberg the other day was talking about positive tipping points. There is possibility that we've already reached a positive tipping point, but we don't know about it. I think a critical mass and a critical awareness is growing, about the vitality of biodiversity for sustaining life and human health. So I think just the last two kind of points, a more holistic, less individualistic place of our view of our place on Earth as an interdependent organism on Earth is crucial. And that's why we need to start looking at the kind of the big timelines, that I was referring to, and just making every contact count. We just all need to keep chipping away. And I think there is change coming if it's painstakingly slow. I really do. And again, to quote Greta the other day, she in her typical articulate kind of self, noble kind of self, it was, it's a privilege to be able to campaign, and she, and it's a moral duty to be able to campaign, but that's how we should look at it, a privilege, I think, to be able to kind of try to change things for the better and protect biodiversity. So I'll finish just with a quote from Owen Dalton. He's recently released a book called An Irish Atlantic Rainforest, where he's restored some temperate rainforests. It's his journey restoring temperate rainforest. And he refers to kind of the health benefits of nature in his book very eloquently. And this is the quote. After spending time in the woods, I leave as a different person, recharged to my very core. All is once again right with the world. Those feelings, a combination of deep joy, serenity, and hope, have never lessened over time and continue to be a huge positive in my life. One which since coming to Barra, I would struggle to go without. In moments, it goes beyond a meditation, to the closest I have come to what might be described as a transcendental experience. Our minds and bodies are hardwired to respond well to being in nature. It really is as simple as that. I think that kind of summarizes it all. Also, more good news, Lula winning the Brazilian election the other day, I thought was we can't state the importance of that. And, so we have to keep focusing on the positives and his commitment to protect the Amazon. And here are, just to finish up, here are some photos of swifts flying over Dublin 8 this summer, and they're an endangered bird. And if anyone wants to kind of be just inspired and by nature, swifts are a great gateway bird, because they're just absolutely magnificent, and they're all around us in the city. So a great way to kind of get inspired. And there's the moon, and just some references there. It was 2 WHO papers where a lot of that kind of meaty content came from. I hope it wasn't too dull. I think I was trying to squeeze it in. The clock was running against me. The IDE paper there from the Irish Medical Journal, and the famous Japanese forest bathing paper. So thanks all so much for taking time off your lunch just to listen to this, and I hope you're feeling a little bit more positive about the future, and understand a little bit more of the relationship between human health and biodiversity. Thanks so much, and thanks for inviting me, Karen, and Irish Environmental Network.
Yeah, thank you, Patrick. I, for one, can't wait for the day when a GP like you sends me to a forest as a prescription. Now, I'd like to open the floor for any questions or comments that folks may have. Okay, one question from Alana. Social prescribing is a wonderful therapy to prevent many mental and physical illness. I understand that medical doctors or trained in medical science. Is social prescribing an area medical students and doctors are being trained in and learning about today? And to what extent, if any, is social prescribing being used in the medical field in Ireland and abroad?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it's a nascent, really. It's at the very beginnings, and it's a huge conceptual shift. For doctors who have traditionally, haven't always been the most holistic, but where doctors are now faced with a lot of societal problems, social problems as well, and that is their role. And there are health, and it does interrelate with health. So I would say that there's a greater awareness. I wouldn't say it's happening at a huge level, no, definitely not, but it's a growing area, and doctors are much more aware of it. The key is training the new generation, as you referred to, and is a part of the syllabus. It is part social prescribing is talked about in medical schools. It's a small side note, at this stage, really, but it's being talked amongst medical communities definitely a lot more. It's particularly in general practice where that's where it can have the most useful. But I think it needs to, it needs to improve, and I think there will be resistance to it, because as I mentioned, it can sometimes be hard to kind of tangibly, doctors are always obsessed with measuring things and evidence-based. It can be sometimes a little hard to kind of convince doctors of the benefits themselves and the establishment when they're stuck in their kind of specific ways of thinking. But I am beneficial that there's a kind of a change in mood, and it will be something we hear more about, and it will be something the public benefit from more, definitely. And I've begun to kind of use it.
Thanks, Patrick. Another question coming in from Michelle. What's your understanding of local biomes and the importance of our food being produced and consumed locally?
Yeah, local biomes, again, it's a huge area of research, and we know very little at this stage, but local biomes, the world's globalized, so local biomes are kind of, it's questionable the extent to which they exist, and the extent to which they've been disrupted by globalized food systems. But I think, that's from food, from food, for example, there's been disruption, but there's still biomes, outside of food, and they relate to our localities, they relate to the nature that surround us, and these haven't been altered. Obviously, they're altered when we travel, potentially. I think I think we processed food, I think, is potentially does, and food that's been interfered with from herbicides and pesticides is going to have a more disrupted biome, and then when consumed will subsequently affect our microbiomes more negatively. So I think it's unquestionable that organic food is kind of going to be more beneficial for our gut microbiomes, but it's kind of to say with certainty what those benefits are in terms of our immune systems and in terms of our ability to break down food. It's early days, but I think a lot of the research at the moment is kind of looking at the idea of early exposure to kind of microorganisms in our lives, and how these can trigger kind of polygenetics, how these can trigger certain genes. And I think there's a weight of research saying that it's very important in our early lives, but presumably I have no doubt that it's also vital throughout our lives. But we'll know more soon, I think.
Thanks for that, Patrick. Another question coming in from Donal. First, a bit of feedback. Great presentation, says Donal. For some of the solutions, you mentioned the challenge of land use, particularly in urban areas. And I know how difficult it can be to influence large and permanent changes to help local biodiversity. For example, some community groups who'd like to grow their own food locally in urban areas are waiting for up to 10 years to get access for this purpose. What do you think needs to change in terms of land access and use in Ireland to encourage more access to land for communities?
Yeah, I mean, urban community farming is a really important area, and I think we need to all take more ownership on food production. I mean, this is going to be a vital kind of the whole farm to fork theory. Reducing that kind of distance between where the food's created and where it's eaten is vital, just on so many levels: the microbiome level, the carbon footprint of food transport, and just the damage that industrialized farming and agriculture does to biodiversity and to carbon emissions and everything that's related to that from the meat and the dairy industries. So I mean, the solutions, I mean, policy, I mean, all the small kind of grassroots stuff is hugely important, and demonstrating that it can work. It's not huge in Ireland yet, really. Let's face it, it's not, and it is in other cities. I think we need to look within Ireland first. If we, as opposed to within our cities. If we can produce more food within Ireland first, it's a huge win for biodiversity, and if we can do it more sustainably. But I suppose policy, again, it all comes from policy, and we're up against a lot with the kind of lobbying forces of the Common Agricultural Policy. But I would suggest, you know, it wasn't suggested in the latest Common Agricultural Policy review, but I would say it's going to be, you know, grants, you know, grant-based stuff. And for community farms, you know, they're very limited at the moment. And the community support agricultural, the CSA schemes have been shown to be very effective in some rural Ireland, rural Irish locations, you know, and getting your box of veg every week of seasonal vegetables. So it's kind of, I don't know how we can really rapidly, you know, improve it, but I think the consumer, as we always say, is the most one of the most powerful kind of vectors for change. So it's just kind of, but or just setting one up and experimenting, I suppose. Yeah.
Thanks for that, Patrick. I had a question, if you don't mind. I was wondering if you could maybe talk a little bit about the importance of equality in terms of access to nature, because, you know, we see in an awful lot of areas there, particularly in less well-off urban areas, there may not be, you know, the amount of trees or access to green space as there would be in some more well-to-do areas. And I was wondering if you could comment on the intersection between kind of equality, health, and nature.
Yeah, I mean, it's shocking really when you see that map and you see how concentrated all the mature, you know, London plains and lime trees are all scattered amongst the most salubrious regions. And this trend is true of all urban, you know, developed urban cities. I think it's an issue of equality, as is climate, you know, climate justice and biodiversity justice. It's policy really. I mean, it's you know, local government and national government is consciously or unconsciously biased in their how they tend to the needs. I mean, there's historical reasons why trees have been planted in these more developed, richer areas are often older areas, so that's why the trees are planted. You know, so but there's no reason for the vast swathes of kind of urban wasteland in our cities that don't have anything, you know, where no trees are planted. And I think, you know, it's such an easy, low-hanging fruit to plant and to care for a tree for the 3 important years after it's planted. And I think it's I think it's kind of, it needs to come from the privileged people, because often the less privileged people don't have the heads, the kind of the resources and the kind of maybe the headspace always to kind of be prioritizing these things when they're prioritizing, you know, other needs like, you know, food and just getting by, etc. So I think it's the onus really falls on those who already have access to nature to kind of lobby for those who don't to have access to it. So that's why I was talking about that little thing that I was involved in, urban tree revival. We want 30% of urban environments to have urban environments have 30% tree cover. And currently Dublin has it's very poor, you know, globally. I think it's under 10%, you know. So it's such an easy win, and for all those reasons we mentioned in the talk, I think it's something, you know, we should be pushing local government to. But again, it's not local government. Are they the problem? No, they don't have any funding, you know, so you follow the trail back. You know, national government isn't giving them enough funding. National government isn't giving enough funding to biodiversity anyway. Look at the National Parks and Wildlife Services, you know, so it's systemic. It's a systemic way of a systemic failure. Like, so I think we just need to demand, and, you know, like democracy works, you know, it's painfully slow, but it does. So just we should be emailing our councillors and asking for trees on the roads, you know.
Thanks, Patrick. And that's a really great segue as to sort of some points I wanted to bring to everyone's attention this afternoon. The first is we would strongly encourage you to make a submission to the Citizens Assembly, which is gathering this November. They have, I think, 2 more weekends around which they're meeting and discussing recommendations to make their way to government. I know we've put in a submission. at the IEN and the environmental pillar. And I'll shortly share with you a link to our webpage with lots of useful resources. But we're also holding an event this weekend on Saturday in Athlone, a national biodiversity gathering, whereby we're gathering local environmental groups and local PPNs from around the country to talk about exactly what you're talking about, Patrick. And that is sort of the intersection between local action and also national action, so through policy. So I'm going to send you all the link to register on Eventbrite for that. You can come in person and we'll have refreshments served throughout the day. It kicks off at 10 a.m. in Athlone. So that there is the link to register, or you can also attend online if you can't make it, but in person would be great. And we'll also share with you a link to, oh, there we go, Catherine did it, thanks. A link to our Citizens Assembly webpage with everything you need to make your own submission, to make our voices heard to our fellow citizens who are meeting this autumn. There's just a couple points coming in on the chat. One is from Jo, really enjoyed the webinar. She's recommended a few books as well, so I'd encourage everybody to have a look at the chat. Silent Earth, The Nature Fix, and What Has Nature Ever Done for Us? And another question from Paula, and that it was a question about how we can protect peatlands. And I just wanted to say, Paula, we did a webinar on peatlands and what we're doing to protect Irish peatlands. So if you'd like to check that out on our YouTube channel, there's lots of information there. And that was given by Dr. Nuala Madigan from the Irish Peatlands Conservation Council. Thank you so much, Patrick, for taking the time to speak with us this afternoon. And thank you to all of you for attending. I hope everyone really enjoys the rest of your day, and hopefully it dries up for everyone.
Thank you so much. Pleasure to be here.